Hello, I'm Benjamin Williams, and welcome back. Today we're in Boson NetSim, and we're still within the infrastructure section within Boson. Today we're going to be implementing multiple spanning tree protocol. So this is going to be, again, another layer 2 configuration because we're dealing with spanning tree, and of course layer 2 is dealing with switches. So we know that we're going to be dealing with switches within this lab right here. So let's go ahead and get into our objective for this lab. It says, configure multiple spanning tree protocol, MST, and become familiar with multiple spanning tree, MST implementation. So this is our lab topology. Basically right here is just telling us what devices we have. Of course, we can just look at it and tell. We can tell that we have our access layer switches, and then we have our distribution layer switches. We have some redundancy throughout. So if one of these connections goes down, STP, well, if one of these connections goes down, it'll have another path to get to the other switch. And of course, STP is going to block one of these links to prevent layer 2 loops from occurring within our network. We can see we have two PCs up here. The access layer switches give those PCs access to the network. And you can see they're connected on the fast Ethernet 05 port on these switches. So let's go ahead and get into this lab. I've already read all of the commands and also the descriptions. We know the access layer is usually a layer 2 level within our network, and then the distribution layer is usually where we go to our level 3, our layer 3. So we usually have IP addresses starting at our distribution layer, and our distribution layer is going to aggregate all of our access layer switches or access layer networks that we have. But of course, this is just the lab, so we're probably going to be running spanning tree, and or with this lab, it's saying multiple spanning tree. So we're going to be running multiple spanning tree on all of these switches. But usually in an enterprise network, that wouldn't be the case. You probably wouldn't be running spanning tree. Your layer 3 boundary would probably be your distribution switches. But like I said, this is just a lab, so it's always good to lab up different topologies and different just lab up different things in general to learn as much as possible. So let's go ahead and get into this lab. We're going to be doing our regular. I'm going to do my CLI down here at the bottom. Let me refresh because it is not allowing me to see my CLI. So let's refresh. Let's go back. All right, so we can see everything now. We're going to keep our topology top left, and we're going to do all of our reading for our lab tasks in the top right. So we have an MST configuration information. So I guess this is what Boson wants our final configuration to be on each of the switches. So let's go ahead and get into our task number 1. It says task 1, configure MST on the access layer switches. So the first question is asking, which VLANs have been configured on each of the switches? So that's easy to figure out. Let's go to each switch. Let's do an enable. Let's do a show VLAN brief. Okay, we can see we have the default VLAN, which is VLAN number 1. And then we have VLAN number 4, 6, 10, 11, and 12. Okay, so that's probably going to be on all of our switches. Let's do an enable and show VLAN brief. Show VLAN brief. Brief. Oops. Brief. Okay, this one has VLANs number 4, 6, 10, 11, and 12 as well. Let's go over here. Let's do an enable. Let's do a show VLAN brief. Brief. Same VLANs configured over here on this access layer switch. And let's do the last one. Let's do enable. Let's do a show VLAN brief. See our VLANs on P2D switch 2. And we can see that they all have the default VLAN, VLANs 4, 6, 10, 11, and 12. So that is on all switches. So perfect. So let's go to question 2. It says, each switch in this lab has a typical VLAN configuration. When per VLAN spanning tree PVST is used, what is true about spanning tree? Well, when PVST is used, each VLAN has its own STP topology, basically. So you would have 4 different, how many is this? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You would have 6 different STP topologies running on each switch, which can take up, just take up some of the memory on the switch exactly. So you can convert this over to MST to save you some memory on each of the switches, and it doesn't have to have, each switch doesn't have to have, basically you can group these VLANs into different MST instances and they would share the same topology instead of having each VLAN have its own VLAN topology or it have its own STP topology. So that's what's true. Let's see what it's going to say. It says when PVST is used, spanning tree by default must run a separate instance of spanning tree algorithm for each VLAN on the switch. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Okay. Right here it says, on each switch, display VLAN information. How many VLANs are running on each switch? Well, we just figured out how many VLANs are running on each switch. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different VLANs running on each switch. Let's go to question 4. It says, which switch is acting as the root bridge for the spanning tree configuration? Let's figure that out. Let's do a show spanning tree. Okay, so we can see for VLAN 1 that A switch 1 is the root bridge. For VLAN 4, A switch 1 is the root bridge. For VLAN 6, A switch 1 is the root bridge. For VLAN 10, A switch 1 is the root bridge. And VLAN 11 is the root bridge, A switch 1. And also for VLAN 12, A switch 1 is the root bridge. So it looks like for each VLAN that A switch 1 is the root bridge for each and every VLAN that we have. Okay, so that'd be this switch right here at the top left. Okay, so it says on the A switches, enter MST configuration mode and map the VLANs to MST instances. Refer to the MST configuration information table for the appropriate configuration information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our top left screen and we're going to go ahead and just scroll down to our MST configuration information so we can have that on screen. Okay. And we're going to start out on our A switch number 1. So let's do a configure terminal. Let's do a spanning tree mode MST. Okay. And let's do a spanning tree MST config to go into MST configuration mode. And let's first do the name. So let's configure the name to be Boson. Perfect. Let's configure our revision to be 1. Revision to be 1. Perfect. Let's do an instance of 1 for VLANs. And we want to do a VLAN range. So we want to do 1, 4, 6, 10. And we can do through 12. Okay. Perfect. And let's do a show pending. Show pending. All right, so we can see instance number 1, it has VLANs 1, 4, 6, and 10 through 12. It has a name of Boson. It has a revision number of number 1. So that's everything that we want. So let's do an exit to apply this. And that's perfect there. So let's go over to A switch 2. And let's get the same configuration over here. Let's do a configure terminal. Let's do a spanning tree mode MST. Let's do a spanning tree MST config. Let's do a name of Boson. Let's do a revision of 1. Let's do an instance of 1 for VLANs 1, 4, 6, 10 through 12. Perfect. Let's do a show pending. And we see the name is Boson. The revision number is 1. And we have instance number 1 with all of the VLANs that we want. So that's perfect. Let's do an exit to apply that. And that is applied on our A switches. So it says right here on the A switches, assign the appropriate region and name to the MST configuration. Well, we just did all of that. And it says right here on the A switches, assign the appropriate revision to the MST configuration. We did all of that. And it says right here on the A switches, apply the newly created MST instances, which we just did. So let's go over to B right here. It says configure MST on the distribution layer switches. So it says on D switches, on the distribution switches, enter MST configuration mode and map the VLAN to MST instances. Refer to the MST configuration table for the appropriate configuration information. So let's go to D switch number 1 first. Let's do a configure terminal. Let's just do the same configuration that we just did. So let's do a spanning tree mode MST. So a spanning tree MST config. Let's do a name of Boson. Let's do a revision of 1. And let's do an instance of 1 for VLANs 1, 4, 6, 10 through 12. Let's do a show pending. Make sure everything is correct. We have the correct name, the correct revision. We have an instance of 1 for all of the VLANs that we want. So let's go ahead and do exit to apply that. Let's go over to our distribution switch number 2. Let's do a configure terminal. Let's do the same configuration over here, a spanning tree mode MST, spanning tree MST config. Let's do a name of Boson. Let's do a revision of 1, and let's do a an instance of 1 for VLANs 1, 4, 6, 10 through 12. And let's do a show pending. Okay, we have the correct name, we have the correct revision, and we have the correct instances in VLANs. So perfect. Let's do an exit right there to apply that. So it basically just wants us to do the region and name, which we already did. We already did the revision number, and we already applied the MST instances. So perfect. So the last step is verifying the MST configuration. So it says verify the MST configuration. So let's do on each switch, let's just do a N. Let's do a show spanning tree. Okay. Let's go over to this switch. Let's do an N. Let's do a show spanning tree. Perfect. Let's go over here. Let's do an N. Let's do a show spanning tree. Perfect. And let's lastly but not least, let's do an N. Let's do a show spanning tree. Okay, so let's hit that. Perfect. All right, so we can see that we have MST number 0, which is the default, and we have MST 1, which we configured on all of the switches. So we see MST 1 and MST 0 over here on this distribution switch. On this access layer switch, which is number 2, we see both of our MST instances. And on our last distribution switch, which is number 2, we can see MST 0 and MST 1. So these switches have the correct MST configuration. Of course, MST 0 is by default there. So we cannot take that away from our configuration. So it says display the spanning tree state information. Are the switches now running MST mode? Or are the switches now running in MST mode? And yes, they are. We just confirmed that on every one of the switches. Okay, for number 3, it says display the running configuration to verify the configured instance for MST. So we can do a show run. Oops, let's click down here. Let's do a show run. Okay, we can see that we have the name that we configured, the revision, and also the instances with all of the VLANs. So that's perfect on this A switch number 1. Let's go to D switch number 1. Let's do a show run. We can see that we have the correct name, which is Boson, the revision number of 1, and the instance number 1 with all of the VLANs here on this distribution switch number 1. Let's go on and access switch number 2. Let's do a show run over here. And we can see we have the correct name, revision, and also instance for all of the VLANs. And lastly, let's go to our D switch number 2. Let's do a show run over here, not a do show run. Okay, let's do a show run. We can see we have the correct name, revision, and instance ID for the VLAN. So perfect. So number 4 says display information about the configured instance of MST. Okay. So it wants us to do a show spanning tree MST config. I think we could do a config. Yeah. So we can see the name, the revision number, and also the instance number 1 with all of the VLANs. Basically, this is just like we did when we were in, this is the same output that we got when we were doing show pending, when we were in MST configuration mode. So we're going to have this output on all of the switches. I can run that on all of the switches just to confirm. Let's do a show spanning tree MST config. Okay, we have the same output here. Let's go over here, do the same thing. Let's do a show spanning tree MST config. We have the same output here. Let's lastly go to this A switch, and let's do a show spanning tree MST config. And we can see we have the correct name, revision, and the correct instances. for the VLANs that we configured. So perfect. So down here it says display the spanning tree summary. So we just basically already seen my spanning tree information, but it wants us to do that again. So let's do a show spanning tree summary. Okay. We can see right here we have two MSTs running, which is MST 0 and 1. We can see some port fast information. We see our root bridges. We see that this switch is the root bridge for MST 0 and 1. This switch is in MST mode, so it gives us some good output there. So once we do this show spanning tree summary on each of the switches, it's going to give us the same exact output, but it probably won't include the root bridge. Let's see what it does on this distribution layer switch. Let's do a show spanning tree summary. Yeah, so it just says that this switch is running MST, but it doesn't say like it does on A switch that it is the root bridge. So for A switch 1, it has this output saying that it is the root bridge, but on this distribution layer switch, that output is no longer there. And we see that we have the same output for the MST instances, and we have two MST instances. So perfect. Let's do a grade. And we got all of these correct. So thank you guys for watching this one. I'll see you in the next one.